When I started flying the Cub, I hadn't really had much experience with fabric airplanes. I'd mostly flown Cessnas and Beavers, the metal wing pipers and stuff. Done some flying in Citabria and a Super Cub before, but not a whole lot of experience with them, not like a Cessnas. Yeah, I had a Cessna 170 and I did a lot of extensive work with that with the mechanic. Got to know how to do sheet metal work and all the engine work and stuff like that on the 170, and then some of the air taxis they operated had 180s, 185s, and Beavers. Airplanes like that I got some experience working on those, but again, not a whole lot with fabric work. When I got this airplane, actually I was leasing a Cub for a while, for a couple of years before I bought my airplane. Anyway, I bought a little kit. Polyfiber has a practice kit, and it comes in a little box with fabric, and of course there's a little instruction manual here, little bottles of MEK and reducer, and like little, even smaller than that, a poly brush and poly spray, and come with everything you need basically to get started. A thermometer and a couple of needles and some thread, and basically it's a pretty good little practice kit. And I basically bought it to have it on hand to do repairs in case I needed. I got any holes poked in the airplane or anything like that. But one of the things that it come with that came in pretty handy afterwards was a wooden frame, about 12 inches by 12 inches, something like that. And then you could practice gluing the fabric on that, shrinking it and poly brushing it and everything like that. I never did use it for a practice kit, as when I started doing the fabric work, I had the mechanic come up and they actually showed me how to do it. But what I did use on that kit was that frame that came with it, and I'd use that to glue the polyfiber to, and then heat shrink it to use to cut out all my little doilies and patches and gussets and stuff like that. Well, I don't know what I've done with that wooden framework. I've got everything else here, but the wooden framework has disappeared, so I'm going to have to come up with something. But I'm going to need to start shrinking some fabric to use for the doilies that go on the inspection covers, and now I've got one to go over this aileron cable exit point on top of the wing, and there's going to be some other places I need some patches and things like that on this wing. So I got to come up with some kind of a framework to use to glue fabric onto so that I can heat shrink it. Actually, they recommend using the lightweight fabric for some of the doilies and patches and covers and stuff, but I don't have any of the lightweight fabric, so we're going to wind up using the regular middleweight fabric for that. Well, I found an old piece of OSB in my lumber shed. I think it'll work okay for what I need. I brought it over here and measured out a opening and hacked it out with the jigsaw. It's not cabinet work, all it is just a jig. I did sand the edges down a little bit to get all of the slivers and stuff off of it so we don't wind up with slivers in the fabric. But then I've got this container here I've been dumping all my old polytack and polybrush and stuff like that into, and it sat here long enough that it was just about solidified. I reconstituted it with some MEK now. Well, no point in using the good stuff on that. Well, I got a cut off piece of fabric. This is actually what come out of the fuel tank bay. Found a cheap brush I can use, a little wider. I had that 1/2 inch brush that I used to put the poly brush on those reinforcement strips. I was going to use it, but it's not really too wide, so I got this cheap brush here. All we need is enough to stick this down so we can shrink it. It doesn't have to be perfect. It's got to be held down fairly solid, because when we shrink it, it's going to want to wrinkle and pull, and we want to avoid that. So now we'll just wait for that glue to set up. Well, I've let that sit for a little while with the old polytack on it. Looks like it's dried up enough. I've got my iron heated to 250. Let's go ahead, look how that thing shrinks. Well, the polytack didn't stick on this other edge up here. Oh, I didn't let it sit long enough. Alright, live and learn. Well, it's shrunk anyway. I've got another one of these grommets here. I'll go ahead and actually I'm going to do something a little different there. What did I do with my... It would be a little better if I had a blunt edge on that rather than that sharp point on that compass, but definitely be better. Now for the fun part. Yeah, I should have definitely waited longer. Probably should have put polytack or polybrush on here too. That was my plan, was to go ahead and coat this with polybrush, but I should have put polybrush or polytack here on the fabric before I started making my cut. Okay, there's one doily. I've got that doily laid out there. I had to cut a hole in the middle of it, of course, to fit that piece over the top of it. Now what I'm going to do is take some polybrush. I've got some mixed up 3:1, and I'm going to go over this whole area. I've got it drawn out here where the doily goes, and I'm going to put some polybrush 3:1 in that. And then I've got 3 other spots there where I'm going to put patches on. I've got the one spot there where the rivet on the tie down that I put in on the F. Atlee Dodge tie down sticks up into the fabric, and then I've got 2 holes in the wingtip there that I burned out. Okay, put a bed of polybrush over that where it's marked out, both inside and out, and we'll let that stuff cure. Alright, while I'm waiting for this bed to dry here to put that doily on there, I've been running a 2-inch bed of poly brush over these ribs and other places where we're going to put finish tapes down. That's, as they say, to put a bed down and let it cure. Some places I said they put 2 beds of that down. Well, we'll probably go ahead and do that. Go over all these places where the tapes go and put a pre-bed down with poly brush. We get drips on there, so dry the brush out and then wipe those drips out. Well, I got that grommet all glued in there with a poly brush. Of course, I glued the grommet down with polytack, but then I put the doily on with poly brush. While I was waiting for the first bed of that to cure up, I went ahead and went over the whole wing where I'm going to put the finishing tapes, except for the leading edge and trailing edge. Got along the spars and along the ribs and on the braces there. So I've got one coat on each one of those. I think I'm going to put another coat on each one of those. That stuff's starting to set up now. And I put these little dollar patches. I got one over this hole and one over the other hole here in the wingtip, and one over that rivet for the tie-down anchor. Now these things I bought, I guess they come from Univer. I got them from Stoddard's. They weren't completely cut off from the circles there, so I had to cut them, and they've got a fold in them right there where the fabric was folded over. So that'll heat out of there when we get ready to take the iron and turn it to 225 and start heating, forming all that to get all the blisters and bubbles and get the pinked edges to stick down and stuff like that. So that's sticking up right now, but that'll get pushed down with the iron when I get ready to do that. Well, I've got the little bit of that poly brush still mixed up. I'm going to go ahead and go over all the rest of these ribs, or as many of them as I can get to with that little dab of poly brush, and put another coat, another bed on there.